Paper 2, question 1, the database question. We will dissect the stem of the question, attempting to show not just the answer, but the reason why a particular answer is the case. Many trees grow rapidly for part of each year, and the consequence of this is that they have a ring of growth called the tree ring. The thickness of the tree ring indicates how quickly the tree grew in a particular year. So we've got two factors here. Each ring, therefore, is a year, so that gives us a timing mechanism. And the thickness of that ring tells us about the quality of growth that was taking place during that period of time. The photograph shows 30 years of growth and the tree rings associated with that. So we're expecting to see 30 years of tree rings there. This is an important last sentence here, which says that the start of each annual ring is light and dark at the end. So if we take a look here, we can see that it is light there, but the end of the year is here. So it's important we recognize that as we identify particular years of growth. And we have 1970, 80 and 90 identified for us. Okay, so let's take a look at question A. Identifying which of the 30 years the growth of the tree was. So we're looking for greatest. So greatest will equal thickest. So if we scan across the rings, can I draw your attention to this particular ring here? So I think, without question, that looks like the biggest ring. And of course, what one could do is actually have your ruler on this just to double check that it is indeed the largest. Okay, so what year was it is the challenge. So we come back to here. So this is 1970, so we'll put 0 for that year. So that must be 1, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. So the answer is simply 1976. The least ring will be the smallest ring. This is something more of a challenge. It would appear by inspection that the smallest rings are in this zone here, and you might want to take a ruler to this, and I think we would probably be measuring this ring here as our candidate for the least. So let's date this then as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this must be 5. So I would give that 1995. So now the question will develop. So let's scroll down to see what's there. The pine tree grew in Shropshire, England. In this area, the rainfall during the growing season was lowest in the years 76, 84, 90, 95 and 96. Using the tree growth ring data in the photograph, so we need to go back to the photograph in a moment, evaluate the hypothesis that low rainfall during the growth season reduces the growth of trees. So low rainfall would therefore result in small tree rings. So what we need to do in our evaluation is go back and look at those tree rings on these dates and check to see if they are indeed the small ones. In that way, we can then match the growth of the tree rings to the poor years of rainfall and try to decide if the hypothesis, our evaluation is, does the data fit the hypothesis? So let's do that by scrolling back towards our our tree rings like this. And we have, of course, got 76 here. And already you can see that we have a particularly large tree ring at this time. So our hypothesis is already looking questionable. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 84. And once more, we have a fairly large tree ring. Not the largest, but certainly not small. And then we look at 90 is here. Again, across the entire span of tree rings presented, I wouldn't describe that as small. 95, of course, we've dealt with already, which is the smallest. So 95 is small. 96 also appears to be small, but 70, 84, and 90, well, those two were large, and that let's call that a medium-sized ring there. So overall, if we then come back to the evaluation, does the data fit the pattern that with low rainfall you get reduced growth in tree rings, so low rainfall, small tree rings? And I would say that the data does not fit the trend. I think you would have to make that point to obtain 1 mark, and you might then specify that 70 and 84 were in fact large rings. So this is the complete contrary position, that 90 itself was a medium-sized ring, and only, or contrarily, you could say that 95 and 96 were small, but they were the only ones that fitted the pattern. So overall, the data presented does not fit this trend line. Pinus nigra is not native to Shropshire. So this is another kind of pine tree, and is actually adapted to warmer climates. So it's not really adapted to growing in Shropshire. Suggest, using the tree ring data, which of the 30 years was the warmest in Shropshire. So I think what we're being asked to do here is that if it's a warm year in Shropshire, then we would expect the greatest growth. And with the greatest growth, we would get the widest or largest tree ring. And we've already established which year this is, which is 1976, with the largest tree ring, or widest if you prefer. This is a 1 mark question, so we need do no more than suggest 76, and that suggests it's the largest tree ring, and that probably is the warmest time in Shropshire for the data presented. Carrying on with the question, the data analysis becomes a little bit more complex. I've slightly resized the window so that we can see the question. The result of a study of tree rings in 4 forests of the same species, Pinus sylvestris, I beg your pardon, it's a different species, Pinus sylvestris, in small areas of Lithuania. So 4 forests in Lithuania. The thickness of the tree rings is shown as a percentage of the mean tree ring thickness in each forest. So if I could explain that idea. So if we have 100%, that means it's the same as the mean. If we have a tree which has a higher percentage, say around 140%, then this means it's larger. This would be larger than the mean, and data which goes below 100 is suggesting smaller than the mean. So in fact, the spread gives us a range of the sizes and growths for that particular time. looking at the data itself, we can see that we've got the 4 sets of data, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the percentages are measured on here. And they're, just by inspection already, we can see that they seem to be ranging from about 140% down to about 60%, perhaps a little bit higher. Let's take a look at the initial question. It says, compare the growth of the trees in the forest. So we have to compare 1 to 4 and give 2 similarities. Okay, so let's go look for those similarities. I'm sorry, I need to scroll for you to be able to see this. So the immediate thing that you can see is that for a particular decade of growth, so this is a decade between here, there seems to be some kind of trough and peak, and that pattern seems to be in each of the decades. So the first thing I'm seeing is there seems to be a 10-year cycle of growth, and that there's a peak and a trough of growth, a high and a low point during that. And indeed, the numbers we identified earlier of about 140% down to somewhere around about 60% for the lower readings seems to be the measure. So we have the decade cycle, we have the 140 high, the 60 low. Also, this particular decade here, so if I just circle these peaks seem to be high. These peaks here also seem to be high. So this is also a very good decade of growth. So that's the 20s, 1920s, and 1940s. They all seem to have the same growth. And indeed, in this decade here, the growth seems to have been very poor in that one for all 4 forests. So you can select any 2 of those. So if I attempt to just summarize some of them, there's the 10-year cycle with the high of 140 and the low of 60%. The peaks seem to be the same in each of the forests, so the peaks at the same time. I think we understand that point. And then we've already spoken of the decades in which we had peak of growth was the same for all of them. So let's choose a particular year for that. So that would be 1920s. Sorry, that I said 40s. That's 19. So it's 1930s, 1940s. So that was correct actually. So the 1940s and the 1920s. 1940s, 1920s. These were peaks of growth, and of course we have the 1970s where the growth was low. So these are similarities that you could have picked out. I think we found 5. Now the next part then asks you to suggest 2 reasons for these similarities. And I think one of the first ones that we might bring in is the fact that all 4 forests are in the same region, and that would suggest that they are enjoying the same climate. So with the same weather and same climate, we would expect the same growth rates. The cyclic nature of the decade probably relates to some kind of temperature cycle, some sort of local weather or climate cycle which is experienced in this particular part of the world as well. So the question has now gone on to discuss further research, and so the data becomes perhaps, arguably, a little bit more complex. And in this stem, which is here, it's telling us that seeds were collected in a region of Scotland. I've attempted a sketch map here at 57 degrees of latitude. So latitude is north and south. So in the study, seeds are collected from latitude 57 and grown there. And we can see this data actually on the graph. So this is going to approximate to this zone on the graph here. And seeds from the south, and indeed seeds from north of this, not particularly in Scotland, but in other European countries, are then collected and taken to this location. So seeds from the south are taken to this location and grown. So here they are here. These are seeds from the south. They're taken to latitude 57 and grown, and we can see the data approximately in this region here. And then seeds from more northerly areas are returned to this southerly 57 latitude and grown there. And we can see that data is here, and we can see the plot of the data there. And I think probably like me, you're starting to recognize that there seems to be a pattern here, which is something approximate, something to this and this. Let's see if that becomes important in the questions. And it does in fact ask, identify the relationship between the latitude of origin and growth. And we begin with 35 degrees and 57 degrees between those areas. So let's go scroll slightly up so we can see it. So 35 degrees is here, 57 degrees is here, and so across this range, what happens as we go to higher latitudes, what happens to the tree growth, and you can see that it increases. So the higher the origin of the seed, the higher the growth. Then if we take a look at the next part, it's asking us for 57 to 70, which in fact we've already thought about this idea. So we're going from here to here, and we can see that our trend pattern is bringing us down, so that in fact the more further north we go, at this point the growth rate, the relative growth rate declines. So the further north, between 57 and 70, we've got less growth, to be less relative growth in fact. It then asks us to suggest a reason for the relationship between the latitude of origin of the imported seed and the growth of the trees. So I think we think of the trees from the south will no doubt have developed in that region over a long period of time and are locally adapted. So I think we need to say that the trees are adapted for growth at their origin. I think we're suggesting better growth at their origin. Then I think we need to state that the trial site has different conditions to the origin, and so this is going to affect the actual growth rates. And we can see from the data that where the seeds are originating from the south, taking them to the north, we get better growth, but where they've come from the north and we take them to the south to 57, we get poorer growth. But we've already established that pattern anyway, but that's the reason for it, that trees are adapted to their particular location, and the trial site is different to their location, except of course for the local trees of that area. Suggest one recommendation based on the results of the growth study, which should be used and given to a person anywhere in the world intended to raise trees from seed. So I think we can say that one needs to be aware of the fact that if you that local seeds will be adapted to that particular location, and they will grow better, perhaps, but certainly, if not better, then we should be aware that they grow differently. I think that's perhaps the key here. So local seeds are adapted to that location. If we take seeds from another area, then we can predict that we will get a different growth pattern, perhaps better, but not necessarily so. 14 marks here. Use this video in conjunction with the mark scheme.